Fabrice the Artist here, and welcome back to another video. And in this video I'm going to explain to you guys all the tools that I use on a regular basis. Now this is a very common question that I get, so I figured I'd go ahead and make a video explaining to you guys all the tools that I'm using. Okay, so let's dive right into it. So I'm going to start with the erasers that I use. These are in no particular order. First off, the most common type of eraser that you are going to use even as a beginner is just a basic kneaded eraser, just like that. Okay, this is something that I've used ever since I first started drawing. You can dab it on the page to make a particular spot a little bit lighter, to remove some graphite or some charcoal. And you can also just rub the page with it as well. So it acts as a real eraser as well as to dab it to lift off some of the graphite and charcoal. So this would be something that I would use as a beginner, intermediate, and an advanced artist, okay? The next one that I use, this is a little bit more of an intermediate or advanced tool right here, which is the Tombow Mono Zero Eraser. And this is a beautiful tool, which I've only discovered just a couple of years ago when I hopped on Instagram and saw other people using it. And I was just blown away. You can press the bottom of it like this, and it's very precise, and you can erase very fine details into charcoal. The thing that I didn't realize up until recently was the fact that a lot of the effects that you create actually come from erasing details into things. It's not just what you draw onto the page, it's literally laying down a foundation sometimes and subtracting off the page. And this is why erasers are so important, particularly as an intermediate and an advanced artist. I wouldn't necessarily get into this as a beginner per se, because for the first like 5 to 10 years of drawing, 10 plus years of drawing, and this was out of ignorance too, but I would say that I didn't have a good understanding of these, and I just used graphite pencils, a kneaded eraser, and tissue paper. That's pretty much it. Anyway, moving on. The next one is a Faber-Castell Perfection eraser, and this was very similar to the precision eraser that I just showed, the Tombow here. The difference with this one actually is you can sharpen it with a regular pencil sharpener, and one benefit that I think this offers compared to the Tombow is the fact that you can use it to subtract very precisely some charcoal off the page. It's not just a matter of making a precise line with it, you can actually use it almost similar to the kneaded eraser, but instead of dabbing it, you can subtract, essentially lift off some of the charcoal powder off the page. But it also can perform as a precision eraser if you sharpen it well enough. So it's a very versatile tool, okay? Lastly, for erasers is just a Derwent electric eraser. Now this one is not very precise. However, just like with the Tombow, you can, cut a sharp end on it. But it's, like I said, it's not for precision. I would say that it's more for erasing darker spots, like creating circular highlights on the page where you can't necessarily make a circle that's small enough and making that erasing motion. So you can simply press the page, boom, and it creates that erased mark, which you otherwise would have to take maybe 10 seconds to do. You can do it in a half a second, so you save a ton of time. And again, I would categorize this as more of an intermediate and advanced tool. That's it for erasers. Let's move on to pencils, charcoal pencils and graphite pencil. My favorite charcoal pencils would be these bad boys right here. General's 2B to 6B charcoal pencils. I love these. They almost never break, assuming that you're sharpening them correctly. So they're very, very high quality. They go on super smooth. Some charcoal pencils Use cheap willow charcoal, which is very poor quality. These are top of the line quality, and they are my favorite. Now, I'm not sponsored by Generals, but hey, sponsor me. Anyway, those are my favorite charcoal pencils. The way you want to sharpen these pencils, I have an Instagram post explaining this. However, just a basic sharpener like this is going to work perfectly. However, you want to use the big circle right there. The longer the tip of a soft or medium charcoal pencil, the more likely that it's going to break, okay? So you're way better off using a larger hole and a more angular tip, okay? As far as graphite pencils go, I just use very basic pencils like either Staedtler, Mars, and Lumograph is one that I like to use. Here's what they look like. This right here is an 8B pencil, and these are very high quality. These would be beginner, intermediate, advanced. They're super cheap, super affordable, super high quality. Now, if you want to get into more precision pencils in terms of graphite, you can start getting into some mechanical pencils such as this. I'm not sure the brand of it, but it doesn't really matter too much. This one is a 0.5 millimeter HB pencil. So I usually use that for very, very fine lines and not a whole lot else. Here's a quick tip with this particular pencil is you can use it on a blank piece of paper or the drawing that you're working on, and you can flatten the tip at an angle, sort of. You will be left with the tip that is sharp on one side and flat on the other side, so that if you hold it a certain way, you can make an extremely sharp line, and if you turn the pencil ever so slightly, you'll have a flat end, so that you can almost create a little bit more blended lines, so without having to switch pencils or dullen it and resharpen it. Okay, very important tool, and I guess this could be beginner, intermediate, or advanced, is General's Charcoal White. Okay, boom. These are fantastic. White charcoal. That's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? So it's interesting because charcoal is never white. It's a misnomer, okay? It's actually a form of pastel, and I think the reason why they call it white charcoal is because it performs almost identical to a charcoal, right? It doesn't go on top of graphite. It goes very well on top of charcoal because it performs the exact same as a charcoal, essentially, okay? The only thing you have to watch out for with this pencil is if you're trying to put it over dark charcoal, you kind of run into, especially if you blend it into the charcoal, you run the risk of it turning kind of blue, okay? So you have to be careful with that. Another pencil that I've just recently started using for my Mike Tyson drawing, and I fell in love with this pencil, is the Faber-Castell Pit Oil Base Pencil. This is an awesome pencil, and I find that it works best to add details on top of charcoal. At the same time, it almost performs like an oil-based black colored pencil, much like the Polychromos pencil. You could probably interchange these with a black Polychromos colored pencil. Okay, and it goes on top of charcoal beautifully. Sometimes you can use it to darken a piece of charcoal on the page or add a little bit of texture on top of the charcoal. Now you have to be careful. If you put this as your first layer, nothing but graphite is going to go on top of it. Charcoal's not going to stick on top of it. You have to put the charcoal first, and you have to do anything with the pit oil pencil on top of the charcoal. Okay, so that's just another thing to keep note of. Okay, so that's it for pencils. Let's go into brushes. I've got 3 brushes that I use on a regular basis. This brush here, which I think is just a no-name brand, cheap art brush. Now, it's quite firm, so it actually really works well for adding dark layers of charcoal powder onto the page. And paradoxically, if you press harder, it'll blend it in very, very well. However, it almost subtracts some of the charcoal off the page. So you almost have to press just a little bit softer with a lot of layer applied to the brush to make a nice dark layer of charcoal powder on the page. The next brush that I use on a regular basis is this makeup brush right here, and it is a medium size and it's a lot softer than the other ones, so it's great for applying a larger layer of charcoal powder to the page, and it's really good for blending, but you're not going to create thinner lines or smaller sections of charcoal powder on the page. So it's not very precise, but it works really awesome. The third brush is one that my mom gave me, and I have no idea where she got it. And this one is very, it's got a little bit of a longer tip to it, and it's very small. And for whatever reason that I haven't yet figured out, but that brush almost acts as an eraser in some way. For some reason, even though it's a brush, if I rub it onto the charcoal powder, it almost acts like an eraser and it pulls off a thin layer of charcoal and makes it a little bit lighter. I'll let you guys know when I figure that one out. Let's get into some blending tools, other than brushes, of course. Blending stumps. So here's a very dirty, larger size blending stump, which is something that I have used in the past a lot, especially before I figured out that using brushes for drawing was a thing. I would probably put that as more of a beginner and intermediate tool, also an advanced tool, but I actually have shied away from using blending stumps, as I find that it creates a very rough look on the page compared to using a brush. And another thing is, it's not very good at applying charcoal to the page, I don't find. At least not as good as using different types of brushes. So I prefer using brushes. If you're an intermediate or advanced artist, I would recommend steering more in the direction of brushes. And at the same time, it'll save you time, because with a brush, you can dip it in the charcoal powder and you can, at the same time, apply it to the page and also blend it in at the same time. So you're killing two birds with one stone. And for all you people that are against killing birds like I am, don't kill birds. So another one here, a Tortillon. This one is a little bit more precise than the other blending stump. Again, I don't really use it that often, but I would say if you're a beginner or intermediate, these are great tools for blending, and as well as applying charcoal powder in smaller, more precise parts of the drawing, okay? Last but not least is, well, maybe the least, I guess. These would be probably the least important tools. However, is the ink and acrylic. It took me a long time to figure out something that was as awesome as this. The 0.7 millimeter Posca acrylic paint pen. This is by far the best paint pen on the market that I'm aware of. And I've used paint pens right from the beginning. As soon as I used to draw portraits, like when I was 15 years old, I was using paint pens for white highlights. I've used every single thing that I could find, and I used gel pens, everything. Nothing worked good enough until I discovered Posca acrylic white paint pen. The best white paint pen that you can find, okay? It costs like $3. However, I will note that it is really easy to get carried away with this, okay? So if you're trying to make white highlights, and if you're anything like me, you're gonna want to rely on that a little bit more. You're gonna fall into the habit of using it instead of erasing those details in. So after a year or two of using this pen, I'm gonna tell you guys, use it very sparingly, okay? Here's a tip. If you can erase white details into the page instead of using this, then do it. I would recommend using the white paint pen, the Posca paint pen, as a last resort, or for little white tiny dots, like little tiny sparkles. For example, on each little water droplet of Mike Tyson, I put a little white dot in the center of each droplet, okay? Like that kind of would have been impossible or very difficult to erase, okay? Like each little dot is not even a millimeter wide, okay? So you can't really erase that in, and it's not going to be as bright anyway. So in that case, perfect use of the Posca paint pen. Other than white dots and very, very fine white lines that are super skinny that you can't possibly erase that narrow, other than that, I would recommend stay away from it. Okay, so another one is the black one. Now, all the same things that I just said apply to this as well, but it's for a different use, okay? So sometimes a black line, a very, very skinny black line, is not achievable with a charcoal pencil. In that case, I would try using a very black ink, or I would use this Posca pen right here. The reason why I use that is because if you have any type of grain on your paper, like any texture at all, and you're trying to make a very skinny line with a charcoal pencil, there is a good chance that the texture on the page is going to literally affect the shape of the line. It's almost like the line doesn't reach the bottom of every little individual tooth in the paper. So you get like not a perfectly straight line, especially if it's a super, super skinny line. So in that case, you can use a black pen like this, okay? And you can make very, very hair thin jet black lines, and that you just can't achieve with charcoal pencil. And another reason too is though, even though charcoal pencils, when they're 6B and softer, are super dark, they're not always as dark as you want them to be. And realism depends so heavily on getting proper values, particularly values relative to each other. It's not necessarily the absolute value, it's the relative value of different values next to each other. If something is darker than something next to it, that's what tricks your eye into thinking that it's a real picture, okay? So sometimes charcoal doesn't go dark enough and it doesn't go thin enough, and in that case I would recommend black ink, or I would recommend the black Posca pen, okay? Don't overuse it, okay? Graphite and charcoal and the other tools that I mentioned before should be your primary tools, okay? Unless you want to be a painter, okay? I would recommend very sparingly using these other ones, okay? Another tool that you can use that's not super critical but can be useful for you if you are like me and you make your pencils. This short, okay? Now, obviously I don't draw with a pencil this short, but if you have a pencil extender like this, you can extend the life of your pencil just a little bit longer and ultimately save yourself just a little bit of money. And we all love saving a little bit of money. I already talked about the other sharpener that I use when I talked about the charcoal pencil, but another brilliant sharpener is this one right here. Okay. It is made by CUM, C-U-M. It's called an automatic long point sharpener. That is a very useful sharpener if you want to have long tips on your graphite pencils. I would never recommend it for charcoal pencils because, like I said earlier, the charcoal is way too brittle, okay? So it's not going to work for charcoal, but for pit oil, pencil, and graphite, it will work beautifully. So the first hole on the left makes a longer dull tip, and then when you put it on the right hole, it sharpens that tip. So you end up with this long, skinny, really sharp tip that you're just not going to be able to achieve with a regular sharpener. I do use a lot of different tools here and there sparingly, but if you're using these tools, this is what I use 95+% of the time, okay? I created my Mike Tyson drawing realistically with nothing other than what I just showed you in this video. you, okay? Anyway, that concludes the end of my video and all the tools that I use on a regular basis, 95 to 99% of the time. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please feel free to hit subscribe and hit the notification bell if you don't want to miss every time that I upload a video. If you're interested in learning from me in a little bit greater detail than I can offer you in these YouTube videos, feel free to visit me on Patreon at Fabrice the Artist. And if you're interested in owning a signed print of any of the drawings that you may have seen on my Instagram page, be sure to check my shop out at Fabrice the Artist on Etsy.com. Okay, and for now, that is it for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in that next video. Peace.